The Wizard of Oz and the Dark Side of Hollywood. Woohoo! Oh my god, do y'all know the lore behind the Wizard of Oz? And like what happened on like the set and just to the people? I'm not gonna lie, I know everything about it. Everything about the Wizard of Oz and probably every other crazy ass movie. I'd be deep diving into it. I like knowing the dark.
This is one of the most iconic films in the history of cinema. According to the Library of Congress, it's the single most watched film of all time. Very few artistic works from the 1930s have managed to persist within the public consciousness, but even now, 82 years later, most of you watching know exactly who these characters are. Far less known, however, are the people behind these characters. Principal photography for The Wizard of Oz lasted from October 1938 to March 1939. During these 5 months, the stars of the movie were subject to some of the most horrendous conditions in the history of the American film industry.
You know what you remind me of, Strat? You know that scene or that part when the Wicked Witch of the West starts fucking going crazy and then all of her little monkeys start flying everywhere? You remind me of one of those.
When it was all said and done, not a single character who set off down the yellow brick road left the land of Oz unscathed.
Five drought even harder than England, rural America is in a desperate plight.
That's not to say that things were much better back home in Kansas. The 1930s were a period of major turmoil and hardship for the American public. The Great Depression ravaged almost every sector of the economy. While most American industries were struggling, the film industry was booming. To escape from the dread of everyday life, most Americans sought refuge in the cinema. Nowadays, about 1 in 10 Americans have gone to the movies in the past week. In the 30s, however, it was not uncommon for half of all Americans to pay a weekly visit to the theater. Hollywood was in the midst of its golden age, a period where studios had unparalleled influence over the industry. During this time, the top 8 studios controlled 95% of American cinema, and no studio was more illustrious than MGM. They were
my dad came into my room the other day, and this is completely off topic, but they're talking about the MGM lion. My dad comes into my room, and I kid you not, I'm knocked the fuck out. He wakes me up, and he goes, "Yo, I need you to help me change my text tone." And I was like, okay, like, this couldn't wait till I woke up. He was like, "Yeah, I want you to change my text tone to a lion roar." And I was like, "To a lion roar?" Like, I was so fucking confused. And he was like, "Yeah, you know the MGM lion that comes on in the beginning of the movies? I want you to change that to my text tone." And I was like, "Okay, like, I can do that when I wake up, but like, you just had to come wake me up out of my sleep to tell me to change your ringtone to a lion's roar?" He was like, "Yeah, it'll match my wallpaper." I was just like, okay.
Each studio widely considered to provide audiences with the biggest stars and the grandest spectacle.
Really random.
MGM smoked the rest of Hollywood with its unmatched financial and critical success. Across the 30s, MGM films
I would say no,
as soon as I got up, I helped him. For Best Picture, and nearly 3/4 of the total profits generated by all 8 major studios. MGM's dominance over Hollywood was due in large part to the strong leadership of its chief executive, Louis B. Mayer, who in 1937 was the highest paid man in America. 1937 also saw the release of one of the most groundbreaking films ever made, and one of the most successful films of the time to not come out of the MGM system. That year, Walt Disney would release his first animated feature film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The film was an immersive fantasy unlike anything audiences had ever seen, and by the following year had become the highest grossing film to date. Snow White's record-breaking success inspired MGM to produce a spectacular fantasy of their own. In 1938, the studio bought out the rights to L. Frank Baum's popular children's novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and the rest was history. A history that some members of the cast and crew wish they could forget. Unlike Snow White, The Wizard of Oz was entirely live action, which presented a series of challenges while attempting to transform fantasy into reality. One of the most iconic scenes in all of cinema is Dorothy waking up in the Land of Oz and the film transitioning from sepia to color. The official coloring method used to develop the film was Technicolor, which required heavy exposure due to the process of splitting the image into different colored channels. As a result, the Oz set required an exorbitant amount of lighting, so much so that the
Strat did not write the script.
Temperature on stage often surpassed 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Damn,
the
Johnny,
heat was suffocating,
you're
and
Batman?
stagehands
That's
frequently had to be
fuck.
carried off stage after fainting. The set lighting was so intense that some actors even claimed to suffer permanent vision damage.
Damn.
The exhaustion suffered from the oppressive heat was only magnified.
That's like when I fucking stream, man. When I be streaming, all these lights, they make my room hot as fuck. My room be steaming, bro.
By the arduous production
schedule.
For 6 days a week, the actors walked into the studio at 4 a.m. and didn't leave until 7 p.m.
That's crazy. What's
a
good,
significant part of each
man?
actor's day was dedicated to the meticulous preparation and removal of their costumes. The Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Cowardly Lion are one of the most recognizable trios in fiction. All three characters were brought to life by the skilled design of makeup artist Jack Dawn. While the costume
my room has to get to at least like 90-something fucking degrees, bro.
Presented an impeccable external appearance, conditions weren't so pleasant on the inside. Every morning as the Scarecrow, Ray Bolger would have to spend an hour getting his latex and plastic mask painstakingly glued to his face, and every evening he would spend an hour getting it removed. The mask completely covered his facial pores, meaning that he was physically unable to sweat while wearing it. One could only imagine how it must have felt to wear that thing for 15 hours a day.
That probably
but
was
Ray
so
Bolger
tiring,
didn't
bro.
have to imagine. For 22 weeks, it was his reality. By the time filming was complete, the repeated applications of the mask left Bolger with permanent grooves around his mouth and chin, but considering what happened to some of the other actors, he may have gotten off easy. The Tin Man was played by Buddy Ebsen for about
I think, just off of my memory, I think somebody got like fucking hepatitis or something.
about 9 days.
From
That's
the
how
snow.
long he lasted during filming until he was hospitalized from a severe reaction to the Tin Man's metallic makeup.
The shit falling in the air.
Ebsen's silver
Hi,
face
Kai.
paint
How
was
are you?
made out of aluminum powder that would eventually coat the inside of his lungs, nearly asphyxiating him.
I remember this too.
As Ebsen sat bedridden under an oxygen tent in the hospital, the studio could not have given him less sympathy. Producer Mervyn LeRoy repeatedly phoned the hospital, angrily insisting that Ebsen return to the set. After 2 weeks out of action, the studio replaced Ebsen with Jack Haley. Much like Pete Best getting cut from the Beatles, Buddy Ebsen would end up becoming one of the unluckiest men in show business. Not only was he unceremoniously fired from what would have been the biggest role of his career, the incident left him with chronic bronchitis. Jack Haley managed to avoid a catastrophic reaction to the aluminum makeup, but it still gave him a severe eye infection that forced him out of work for days.
Damn.
The rest of the suit was so stiff that it rendered Haley unable to sit down or lie down during filming. In order to rest in between takes, he was forced to lean on a reclining board. But despite all the complications it caused, the Tin Man costume may have still been preferable to that of the Cowardly Lion. Burt Lahr's lion suit was compared to carrying around a mattress. The bulk of the costume consisted of a 60-pound lion hide. A real lion hide.
They just got a real lion. They got a real fucking lion to wear. It's never that deep.
Combined with additional padding,
they probably could have spent less money on a real lion and
Burt Lahr would become drenched in sweat after just a few minutes, and he would frequently have to take off the suit between shots to avoid exhaustion. The prosthetic mask covering his face didn't allow him to fully open his mouth, forcing him to consume all of his on-set meals through a straw. Halfway through production, Lahr gave in and sacrificed an additional hour each day in the makeup chair so that he could eat solid food at lunch.
It looks like Stratus.
As someone who was known by his peers to be a hypochondriac, Burt Lahr was in near constant agony. But by far the worst costume-related accident during the whole shoot happened to Margaret Hamilton, better known as the Wicked Witch.
I knew it.
Nowadays, there are lots of ways to make someone look green, but in 1938, the only tried-and-true method used by Hollywood makeup artists was copper paint. Copper, of course, is toxic when ingested by humans. This was known back then, but the studio showed no restraint in applying the copper concoction directly to Hamilton's face and hands. Towards the end of production, Hamilton realized that the constant application of the witch's makeup had tinted her skin green, an effect that lingered for months after the
You know what I'm doing? I'm airing that bitch out. Let me take that makeup off and I'm done filming, but I'm still fucking green, or I'm airing that bitch out, or I'm blowing it up in GTA, of course.
Wearing the makeup on set was a constant struggle. Once it was on, Hamilton was unable to touch anything without staining it, and required assistance to perform the most basic of tasks. But the day-to-day struggles of the makeup would pale in comparison to the accident she suffered on December 23, 1938. When departing Munchkinland, Hamilton was scripted to exit the scene in a fiery cloud of smoke. The first attempt at the stunt went flawlessly, but director Victor Fleming wanted to get a few extra takes for insurance. On the fourth attempt, the pyrotechnics were ignited too early, causing Hamilton to be engulfed in flames. The accident resulted in second-degree burns on the whole right side of her face.
Damn.
The skin on her right hand was entirely scalded off. But before Hamilton could even receive medical attention, she had to slowly and excruciatingly have the copper makeup removed from her freshly burned skin with rubbing alcohol.
No,
Margaret Hamilton would spend the next 6 weeks in the hospital before returning to the set. On her very first day back, she was scheduled for the skywriting scene, another stunt involving pyrotechnics. Hamilton adamantly refused to put herself anywhere near fire again and threatened to walk out of the production right then and there. Since the project was nearing completion at that point, the studio acquiesced, and the scene was completed using Hamilton's stunt double, Betty Danko. While filming that very scene, the smoke pipe underneath the broomstick exploded, and Danko was violently flung from the installation.
Like, none of these niggas can do any of their fucking stunts right. Well, not the people who are doing the stunts, but the people on set who want these stunts to happen need to get fired. Because what the fuck? Somebody is engulfed in flames and burned, and then the next person's broom explodes and they get injured too.
The explosion was caused by the special effects crew coating the pipe with asbestos.
Oh, the special effects crew was just a bunch of idiots.
Another toxic substance once thought to be an all-purpose wonder material. Asbestos was also used in Ray Bolger's scarecrow suit, as well as the snow in the poppy field scene.
I knew, yes.
Unusual weather we're having, ain't it?
This shit was dangerous.
Betty Danko was hospitalized for 11 days with internal damage from the explosion, as well as a 2-inch deep gash on her leg. A wound that would never fully heal. It was a hefty toll for a gig in which she earned just over $800. The long-term health effects on Margaret Hamilton were far less known. What is known is that she would go on to develop Alzheimer's later in her life, a condition that has been linked to copper poisoning.
That's probably 1,000% why. They make us remove all
In total,
the
6 performers on The Wizard of Oz faced some kind of serious physical trauma. Not even Toto left the set intact. However, after an
Wait, what happened to Toto?
Physical trauma. Not even
Toto was forced out of action for 2 weeks with a sprained foot after one of the witch's guards accidentally stepped on her. Toto too? They hurt Toto!
And Toto left the set intact.
Everybody on the set needs to get beat up.
Passed, many of the actors could look back on the whole ordeal as a bunch of amusing war stories.
I'm
Most
RKOing
physical
the fucking
ailments
director.
are only temporary. Mental ailments, on the other hand, tend to stick with you for life.
GG's.
And out of everyone in the land of Oz,
oh my god, they made Dorothy, her, in order to keep her staying young, they used to make her smoke cigarettes, like hella cigarettes, on set, because apparently there was like a myth back then that like smoking cigarettes kept you looking young. So back then on the set they used to make her smoke hella fucking cigarettes, bro, just so she can stay looking young for the movie. Weird. And one of the little dwarves, one of the little people, he loved himself on set, on one of the trees on set in the background of the movie. Really crazy.
Perhaps none.
I'm surprised that wasn't something that was named
too. The star of the show, Judy Garland. She was without a doubt one of the most talented performers of the 20th century. Her portrayal of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz has served as an enduring symbol of youth and innocence. And even though she was never imprisoned by a brutal costume like the other actors,
what does that mean?
The studio paid no less scrutiny to her appearance. Since the character of Dorothy was envisioned as a prepubescent girl, the then 17-year-old Garland had to constantly wear a tight corset to hide her more mature figure. But that was merely one aspect of the studio's efforts to keep Judy thin. Garland was placed on a shoestring diet, one that would not provide her with enough energy to complete the arduous filming days. To compensate, the studio kept Garland on a steady intake of amphetamines to keep her working long into the day. The amphetamines subsequently necessitated the use of barbiturates to prevent Garland from exhausting herself. Years later, she claimed that during some periods she would only sleep 4 hours every 3 days. The fact that she was able to perform as well as she did under
4 hours every 3 days is fucking insane. So not only did they have her on fucking cigarettes, they had her on fucking drugs.
Conditions is nothing short of astonishing. By the end of production, Garland was addicted to both drugs, an addiction that would last for the rest of her life.
Wow.
It certainly didn't help that her time as a child star directly contributed to deep-rooted psychological problems. Despite her brilliance as a performer, Garland was always encumbered by major esteem issues. The insecurities began when a 14-year-old Garland overheard the MGM executives referring to her as a fat little pig.
Wow.
This moment completely devastated
And they're all ugly as shit. Like, holy fucking ironic?
Her self-image, and manifested itself as an unobtainable standard of perfection that she spent her whole life chasing. And even though she would wind up becoming one of the greatest performers ever, in her mind it was never good enough. In many ways, Judy Garland was the first tragic child star, an archetype that has sadly become much more common in
so
modern
many of
times.
them, bro.
Clinical
Hollywood is
psychiatrist
a
John
dark
Linden
place,
encountered
bro.
many such patients while practicing in the Los Angeles area.
Hollywood
He
is a
observed
dark
that premature
place, bro.
stardom resulted in
Fucking
many
insane.
child actors forming severe identity issues. They tended to report
Ow.
a feeling of profound emptiness when they weren't performing, as if they were marionettes whose true selves lacked any sort of meaning. The reason so many young stars end up on the downward spiral is that many fail to develop any sense of individual identity. Some attempt to fill this void with sex, drugs, and alcohol, but it's often no
Mainly
match for the
drugs and
constant
alcohol.
anxiety of never really understanding who you are. There exists a tragic irony between Judy Garland and Dorothy, a character who wanted nothing more than to find
You know
joy and
that's the girl
comfort
who
in a
played
wayward
Starlight in The
world.
Boys?
Unlike Dorothy, however,
I
Judy
don't
Garland
watch
never
The
made
Boys.
it over the rainbow.
Ben Affleck
On
mentioned?
June 22nd, 1969, Judy Garland
'cause
was
CJ?
found dead of an overdose on her bathroom floor. She was just 47 years old.
Wow.
In the years leading up to her
Only
death,
47 is fucking crazy, and it's all the people in The Wizard of Oz's fault. It's their fault. The crew's fault. What y'all know about the downward spiral, my boy EMP Lemon?
her increasingly erratic downfall was treated by the media as some sort of morbid spectacle. The American public seemed unable to reconcile how she could have possibly been anyone other than the innocent farm girl from Kansas. Hollywood has the remarkable ability to make the wildest parts of our imagination come to life. But the magic of crafting immersive
It's not worth it,
comes
man.
with a very real dark side.
Not worth it.
Oftentimes it's easy for studios
We should
to
just like
produce
make all AI movies now. Or actually, I think it's better now, of course. Because now we have like fucking CGI and, you know, it's more professional now and safer for people who act and shit. But
side of the real-life human beings at their disposal, and to end up
niggas
treating
don't even
them
really
as,
watch TV like that
well,
anymore.
marionettes. It would be easy to look back at all the trauma from The Wizard of Oz and chalk it up to a
AI-generated
product
movies
of
would
its
be ass. They
time.
probably would low-key be
Back
ass.
then, studios could just get away with all of it because if any actor fought back, they would be blacklisted from the industry. But still, even after the
That's
studio's
why they
iron
didn't
grip
sue.
over the industry was broken and actors gained more leverage over their careers, it would be naive to suggest that much has
I used to
changed in
think Hollywood was
Hollywood.
fun. Me too.
The inner
I
workings
used
of
to
the
think the
film
exact same
industry
thing,
have
Princess.
always been an enigma. The history of Hollywood is smeared with talented people guilty of
Wow. That's
terrible
interesting.
things. Very rarely do we ever get to discover what
Wow.
truly goes on behind the big green curtain. Out of every scandal
That's
that does come to
fucking crazy.
light, we can only imagine what remains in the dark. In the business of telling the biggest stories possible, the smaller stories often get left behind. For 22 weeks in 1938 and
Holy
1939, 6 of Hollywood's most talented actors were practically tortured, with many of them
Literally.
experiencing long-lasting and permanent damage to their bodies and minds. The result was one of the single greatest artistic works of the 20th
Yeah.
century.
Wizard
The
of
Wizard
Oz
of
is
Oz was the
legendary.
defining career achievement for every single person who worked on it. Their suffering had directly contributed to the most beloved
that's
film
not-
of a generation. It's tempting to dismiss everything you've heard today as an exploitative cash grab from greedy media tyrants, but for MGM, it was never that simple. In 1939,
insane.
MGM released 41 films in total,
There's
premiering
probably a
new
story
movie
for
once
every single one
9
of these
days
movies,
on
dude.
average. At this time, the studio
Every
had no
single
shortage
one.
of revenue.
Thank
What
you,
they
Gojo.
coveted instead was prestige. Every year, MGM would earmark one production as their prestige film. A project that was never intended to turn a profit, but one that existed for the simple purpose of flexing the cinematic might of the studio.
Literally.
From its very conception, The Wizard of Oz was designed as a monument to the single most dominant empire in the history of the film industry. 35 years after the film's release, toy executive Marty Abrams was conducting market research on local children and found that 80% recognized the characters of Oz.
Okay.
Today, memorabilia attached to these characters now
There's literally a movie coming out,
over
Oz,
the years, the performers who brought these characters to
and
life have gradually faded from public
she's
memory.
the main one that I know
Their
in there.
sacrifices ultimately forgotten. Dorothy,
movie's
Scarecrow,
still
Tin Man, Cowardly Lion,
fucking
and
lives
the
on
Wicked
Wicked.
Witch
Yeah,
have
Wicked,
managed
not
to outlive
Oz.
them.
Fucking idiot.
Such is the ultimate destiny of people in show business. Actors are tragically temporary. Eventually, only the characters remain. Today, it may seem unfathomable that our most popular and celebrated actors will inevitably meet the same fate. But at the end of the day,
Gojo,
it is our—
why are you trying to fuck Shazam? You can't fuck people in my chat, buddy.
art, not the artist, which stands the test of time. Despite the
1000%
turmoil suffered by
princess.
the actors on the set of Oz, one has to wonder if any of them ever regretted it. "4,500 years ago, the ancient Egyptians completed the Great Pyramid of Giza.
What the fuck?
A structure so remarkably ambitious
Where did we go from Hollywood to fucking the Pyramid of Giza?
that it would stand as the tallest building on Earth until the Middle Ages. For millennia, archaeologists found it inconceivable that it could have been constructed by any other means than a massive workforce of slave labor. The pyramid defied our expectations to such an extent that some people believe it had to have resulted from supernatural or extraterrestrial influence. However, recent archaeological studies have uncovered a truth that is somehow even more unbelievable. The vast majority of people who built the Great Pyramid were volunteers. The ancient Egyptians risked life and limb to participate in something greater than themselves. Their reward for 20 years of deadly backbreaking labor is that we still talk about them today, long after everything they knew and loved ceased to exist. What would you be willing to sacrifice if it meant you could live forever? Since the dawn of civilization, mankind has sought the secret to immortality. We can only wonder if science or religion will ever help us achieve eternal life. But at the very least, art can get us pretty damn close.
So niggas just went on a whole side quest about the Pyramid of Giza, all in the end to just say art? What'd he say?
But at the very least, art can get us pretty damn close.
He did all that yapping just to tell us art? Okay. Holy fucking side quest, I guess.